My son once begged me for $15,000 to cover his bills. I gave it without question. This Christmas, he repaid me by plotting with his wife to declare me incompetent so they could seize my $600,000 home and the lake cabin Evelyn safeguarded for me. The shock nearly broke me until I found what she had hidden. They will regret their words and actions. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat in the living room long after the Christmas lights had gone dim, the soft glow of the old string of bulbs Evelyn had insisted on keeping each year, washing the oak walls in a tired yellow. The boards under my feet creaked the way they always had, familiar and unchanging, yet everything felt different now. I had laid those oak planks with my own hands back in 1985, sweating through my shirt, hammering until midnight just to make sure my family had a solid home. The fireplace still held our wedding photo, Evelyn's smile frozen in the golden frame, and every time I looked at it, I felt the sting of what had just happened with Michael and Sabrina. I couldn't stop remembering the sacrifices I had made. I had written checks for $60,000 so Michael could walk across that college stage debt-free. I had emptied another $25,000 from my savings account to put him in a reliable car when he first started working. And when he wanted a wedding fit for a storybook, I paid $18,000 so he could stand under chandeliers and make promises of love. All of that effort, all of that money, all of those sleepless nights worrying about tuition payments and car loans, now answered with a cold envelope instead of his presence at my Christmas table. The envelope didn't even carry a signature that warmed the heart, just typed words that felt like ice. I stared at the paper until my eyes blurred, wondering how love could turn into something so transactional, so careless. The more I sat there, the more the house itself seemed to whisper back to me, as if every picture frame and scratch in the wood carried a memory. This house, worth nearly $600,000 in today's market, was more than just a building. It was the stage of our lives. On the wall by the kitchen, faint under the latest coat of paint, was the little handprint Michael had pressed when he was only 8 years old, his fingers sticky with red paint from an art project. On the dining table, the one I refinished with varnish until my hands smelled of turpentine for days, we had shared Thanksgivings and birthdays, the surface worn but polished with family history. And then there was the cabin by the lake, still hidden in paperwork, a place Evelyn and I had always escaped to when life became too loud. The smell of pine there, the old wood stove that hissed when the first log caught fire, the dock where she loved to watch the sunset, all of it held pieces of us. To imagine Michael and Sabrina circling these places like vultures, waiting to claim them, was more painful than losing the money itself. The assets had value in dollars, yes, but their true worth was bound up in memory and relationship. That was the part they were tearing apart without a second thought. Looking back, I should have seen the cracks much earlier. It wasn't all at once, this betrayal. It was a slow shifting of ground beneath me. After Michael married Sabrina, it was like a curtain had dropped. He still called, still showed up, but always with her voice guiding the conversation. If I asked him about work, she answered. If I offered help, she spoke for him. He became quieter, more distant, like a man reading lines someone else wrote. Last Christmas, he had arrived late, brushing it off with a laugh and the excuse that they were tied up at her parents' place. This year, there wasn't even the courtesy of a phone call, just a courier handing me that envelope. I pulled down an old photo album from the shelf that night, the one Evelyn loved. Inside was the fragile paper star Michael had made in 3rd grade, its corners bent but still shining in glitter. Evelyn had always placed that star on the table each Christmas, right in front of his plate, as if to remind him of who he once was. I held it in my hands, and it trembled, just as my heart did. How far he had drifted, and how blind I had been not to see it sooner. But if I were honest with myself, the legal fracture had already begun years earlier. I remembered the sick feeling in my stomach when I saw that forged check, $15,000, drawn in my name to a contractor in Tennessee I had never met. The signature looked close enough to fool the bank, but not me. My hand shook when I held it because I recognized the clumsy attempt to imitate my writing. I knew then what had happened. I knew Michael, or perhaps Sabrina, had done it. And yet I stayed silent. Evelyn was sick that year. Her doctor's appointments were swallowing my calendar, and I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. Maybe it was a one-time mistake. Maybe I had misunderstood. But deep down, I knew. And by choosing silence, I permitted them to push further. That check was a warning shot, and I ignored it. Now the cost of that decision was staring me in the face. I leaned back in my chair and spoke softly into the empty room, the way I had so many times since Evelyn passed. "You knew, didn't you?" I whispered. "You always knew they'd try this." Her handwriting had always been neat, almost schoolteacher-like, in the little notebook she kept in the drawer. I found it again that evening, running my fingers over the indentations of her pen strokes. She had made lists, cross-referenced bills, and noted down small reminders. But tucked between the grocery notes and reminders to pick up prescriptions were hints that she had been planning for the day I might stand alone. Seeing her words gave me the strength I hadn't felt in weeks. She had not left me empty-handed. She had left me tools. The storm of betrayal inside me began to shift into something sharper, something steadier. I realized I didn't have to sit in this living room like a victim of their choices. I had survived wars of bills, mortgages, and illness. I had built this life from bare studs and sawdust. I was not as powerless as they wanted me to feel. I straightened the notebook on the table and noticed how carefully Evelyn had underlined certain lines, how she had tucked away phone numbers and account references. For the first time since Christmas, I felt the air clear in my chest. I wasn't broken. I was waking up. I rose from the chair with a determination that surprised even me. My feet carried me to the desk we had shared, the one with the brass handles that always squeaked when pulled. I knew Evelyn had a habit of hiding things in the top drawer, folded papers under a false bottom, little envelopes marked in her tidy script. That night, I decided to look. The drawer groaned as I pulled it open, the smell of old paper and ink rising up. My fingers brushed against something unfamiliar, stiff and sealed. A single envelope sat wedged against the back wall, just out of easy sight. My heart thudded as I pulled it free. The sound of the drawer sliding shut echoed like a drumbeat. Inside that envelope, I felt the weight of possibility, a choice, a path forward. Whatever was written on those papers, I knew it would lead me to the next step. I set it on the desk under the lamp, the light catching the edge, and took a deep breath. The chapter of sitting in silence was over. Tomorrow, I will act. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I kept the envelope under the lamp and watched the light slide across the flap the way sunrise slides over frost. The house was so quiet I could hear the furnace tick. My hands rested on the desk for a minute, palms down, as if I needed the oak to steady me. I didn't want to open it. Opening it meant admitting that Evelyn had seen this day coming, the day our son chose another family's table over ours, the day our living room felt like a stranger's. I slipped a finger under the paper anyway and broke the seal. Her handwriting, small even, no wasted ink, spoke like she was across from me, elbows on the wood, eyes steady. If I am gone, open the lower drawer, lift the false bottom, and take the small key. Use it with the folder marked Henderson Ridge. Do not call Michael or Sabrina. Call Hank. Call Arthur. Keep this note. I read it twice, then set it beside the lamp, and the lamp seemed brighter. The lower drawer stuck the way it always had since I sanded it wrong 10 years ago. I tugged, eased, tugged again until it gave with a tired wooden sigh. There were paper clips and address labels, a book of stamps, an old pocket calendar with Evelyn's tiny boxes filled in, and then my thumb found the back edge of a thin panel. It popped up like a lid on a biscuit tin. Beneath it, folded small, lay a square of the blue quilt she used on cold nights. Inside the cloth was a brass key no longer than my thumb and a manila folder with a clean tab. The key felt warm where my skin touched it and cold around the edges. I opened the folder. It held a deed to a small parcel at Henderson Ridge, lake access, and a modest cabin. Title in my name only. Clear. No joint tenancy. Not part of the probate mess circling the house. Evelyn had tucked a second note behind it. Henderson is yours. Keep it quiet. It is a place to rest, and a line in the sand. I sat very still and let the relief move through me like heat from a wood stove. She hadn't only loved me, she had prepared for the exact kind of storm that was now rattling the windows. I set the key on the desk and watched the lamp catch on the grooves. Then the phone rang. Sabrina's name lit up. For a second, I thought of letting it go to voicemail, but it's better to hear a lie than to wonder how it sounds. I answered. Her voice was soft and careful. Dad, we'll swing by tomorrow to collect keys and papers. It'll help us keep things straight for you. You've been forgetful. That last word landed like a shot of cold water to the back of the neck. Forgetful. I looked at the key and the deed and Evelyn's note and felt the old anger shake itself awake. Not necessary, I said. I kept my voice even. Everything's where it needs to be. We'll make it easy, she said, sweet as syrup. Good night, Sabrina, I said, and hung up. I pulled a yellow pad from the drawer and wrote 5 names in a straight line. Hank Lawson, Arthur Blake, bank manager, Dr. Sloan, Nora Pierce. Under that, I wrote 3 rules I could hold in one breath. Document everything, never argue, let the paper speak. At 7 sharp, I carried my coffee across the yard and knocked on Hank's side door. He answered in thick socks, a flannel shirt, glasses crooked, and the morning paper under his arm. 30 years of practice had taught him the slow kind of calm I needed. I laid the deed on the kitchen table that he and his wife had eaten at for 40 years. He turned it with 2 careful fingers and read in silence. All right, he said. Record it at the county this week. Make 3 certified copies. Put 1 in a fireproof bag. Don't send anything by email. And Frank, no arguments on the porch. If they push, you tell them all communication goes through counsel. He poured coffee and slid a mug toward me. You're not crazy, he added. You're cautious. There's a difference. Keep everything ordinary and on the record. I nodded, and the knot at the base of my neck loosened a little. By 9, I was on the phone with Arthur Blake, the accountant who took over our returns when Evelyn retired from the district. I told him about the deed. He said, "Hold a second," and I could hear paper whispering. Evelyn told me to open a sealed file only if you called with a particular phrase, he said. Henderson Ridge, I said the words out loud. I could picture Evelyn smiling at the kitchen sink, pleased she'd built a password out of ordinary life. Arthur came back. 5 years ago, your wife established a private trust. She funded it with her savings and a small policy payout. Balance today is about $420,000. You're the sole trustee. Successor trustee is Nora Pierce, the attorney Hank usually sends folks to. Distributions are at your discretion. There's a letter of intent in her handwriting describing the purpose, your long-term support, property upkeep, and charitable gifts of your choosing. There is no role for Michael or Sabrina. I set the phone on the desk and pressed my palm over the receiver so I could breathe. Send me the most recent statement, I said. Paper mail to the box, nothing electronic. Already queued, he said. And Frank, he added, your wife was very deliberate. Follow the paper. You'll be fine. I rang the bank next. The manager knew me by name because I still like walking in with checks and a pen. She put me through to a security specialist who talked like a man building a fence, post by post. We set text and email alerts for any transaction over $200. We enabled 2-factor authentication on every login. We placed a hard limit on withdrawals over $5,000 unless I appeared in person with identification. We added a verbal password that only I would know. We checked the old signature cards and removed Michael from a decade-old authorization he'd used once when I had surgery. We ordered a new debit card with a number not cashed anywhere and moved the existing checking balance into a fresh account number so nothing familiar could be pulled. "Do you want a safe deposit note on file?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Record that I requested all of this of my own free will." He typed for a while. I could almost hear the fence posts sink into the ground. When I hung up, I called Dr. Sloan's office. "I want a full cognitive evaluation," I told the nurse. "Memory, attention, executive function. I'm asking for it myself. I want a letter in my chart confirming I'm competent to manage my affairs." She asked if everything was all right. "It will be," I said. "I'm building a record." "Thursday at 10, she said. I wrote it on the pad and underlined it twice. I stood at the kitchen window for a minute and watched a gray squirrel run the fence line like it owned the neighborhood. There is a peace that comes from pushing back with nothing more than the truth. I let that peace settle in my shoulders. By late morning, I was ready to hire counsel. Hank had told me to call Nora Pierce when trouble involved both blood and paper. She answered on the second ring. Her voice carried the steadiness of a head nurse. I told her everything, in order and without heat. The courier on Christmas morning, the photo of Michael at Sabrina's family table. The $15,000 check from 2 years ago was made out to a contractor in Tennessee, the one I'd swallowed because Evelyn was sick, and I thought keeping the house quiet would keep her steady. The deed, the trust, the phone call that used the word forgetful. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she exhaled once and said, "We're going to paper the perimeter. Bank statements, doctor's letter, affidavits from people who see you every week, and notarized copies of anything they could twist. No arguments in kitchens, no late-night explanations. If they want to talk, they talk to me. Meanwhile, you live your life out loud and on routine. People who are planning guardianship don't love routine. It ruins their story." I told her Hank had already checked the deed. "Good," she said. "Arthur will courier trust statements to my office. You do your errands. You say hello to neighbors. You keep receipts. If they try a surprise visit, you text me and you text Hank. And Frank, don't give them a single key." I smiled, really smiled, for the first time in days. I spent the afternoon building the record she wanted. I printed utility bills and insurance declarations. I found the notarized bill of sale for the old pickup and wrote a short statement about the day I sold it, the price, and who witnessed my signature. I printed the bank security confirmations and slid them into a binder. On the spine, I wrote, in block letters, "Daily Management by Frank Whitman." I called Martha at the hardware store and asked if she would write a simple affidavit about the way I shop. She said yes before I finished asking. "You come in every Thursday for little things," she said, "and you always ask for number 8 screws when you need number 8 screw." I called Sam at the grocery, and he said he'd write that I read the unit prices and always find the ripe avocados. "I'll put it on our letterhead," he added, proud. Their kindness made my chest ache, not with weakness, but with relief. By 3, I needed air that didn't smell like paper. I put the key in my pocket, took a thermos, and drove to Henderson Ridge. The road out of town starts as a farm, then tightens into pines that lift the sky. I rolled down the window despite the cold. The gravel drive crackled under the tires. The cabin sat back among trees, with white paint gone soft and blue shutters fading in a way that makes you trust a place. I stood on the porch and listened to ice shift under the skin of the lake. The lock turned smoothly. Inside, the air held the soft sweetness of cedar. On the mantel stood a photo from our 35th, my tie crooked, Evelyn laughing at nothing in particular. A small list, taped under a thumbtack, read, "Coffee, eggs, bread, cinnamon," in her tidy rise and fall. 2 boxes by the couch were labeled in her hand, "Frank's Things." I opened one and found her cookbooks with little notes in the margins. Add more nutmeg. Cut the sugar by 1/3. Bake 5 minutes longer if the oven runs cool. I traced the pencil marks with my finger and said, "You didn't leave me alone, Evie." It felt true. I walked the circle of rooms and checked the windows and the back door like a man claiming ground. The bed was made with the blue quilt she'd sewn from my worn shirts. The bathroom mirror had a faint ring of cleaner I wiped away with my sleeve without thinking. Out the back window, the dock looked like a pencil laid across polished stone. I pictured spring. I pictured coffee on the stoop and a line in the water and a morning that didn't owe anybody anything. On the way home, I kept the radio off so I could hear the tires hum. I thought about the word Sabrina had used. Forgetful. I said it once and set it down like a hammer I was done with. My word was ready. Ready means you stop hoping people will be who you want and prepare for who they are. Ready means kindness grows a spine. Ready means you keep your voice low and your documents high. The brass key warmed against my leg like a coin that had spent all day in my pocket, earning its place. Back in town, I stopped for stamps. I stopped at the clinic and dropped a simple list of medications along with a page of questions for Dr. Sloan so her letter would be easy to write and hard to argue with. At the bank, I signed the paper for the withdrawal limits and asked the clerk to print a dated summary. I placed a letter in my safe deposit box stating in plain words that I had requested each protection by my own choice on my own schedule. The clerk asked if I wanted a copy. 2, please, I said. She smiled the way people smile when something ordinary turns out to matter. Dusk slid over the block, and the porch light clicked on by itself. A dark sedan idled at the corner longer than most cars sit unless the driver is lost. I noted the time on my pad and let the curtain fall back. I made a grilled cheese the way Evelyn liked it, butter spread to the edges, pan heat kept just shy of hot so the bread browned without burning. I ate standing at the counter and sorted the day's papers into a banker's box. When the box was full, I carried it to the bedroom and set it at the foot of the bed. It helped me sleep to keep what mattered within reach of my feet. Before I turned in, I texted Nora. If they push guardianship, I'm ready. Her reply arrived like a level set on a board. Good. Sleep. We build in daylight. I set the phone face down and watched the ceiling fan blades slow into a blur. I counted what I had put in place. Deed, key, trust, bank protections, doctor appointment, witness letters, binder. The list felt like armor you can wear under a sweater. I slept in pieces, the kind of sleep where your mind keeps pacing and your bones finally say enough. Morning broke clean and blue. I brewed coffee with a pinch of cinnamon the way Evelyn taught me and carried a mug to the desk. I read the deed again and spoke the parcel number out loud until it stuck like my own address. I made 2 copies and slid them into plastic sleeves. I labeled a small fireproof bag Henderson Ridge, tucked the key inside, and stowed it behind the extra quilts in the hall closet. Near noon, a text from Michael came through. Dad, can we stop by tonight to help with paperwork? It will save you a lot of trouble. The old reflex to explain stood up in me like a dog that hears a gate swing, but I didn't feed it. Not tonight, I typed. Everything is in order. He sent a thumbs up. I could hear the quiet confidence behind that little icon, the confidence of a man who thinks time and pressure fold a parent like laundry. Let him think it. Thinking isn't the same as having. I drove to the hardware store and picked up Martha's affidavit. She had signed it in her careful hand, noting the dates she saw me, the way I ask for number 8 screws when I need number 8 screws, the way I count out exact change when I feel like it, and swipe a card when I don't. At the grocery, Sam handed me his letter on store letterhead. He wrote that I compare the price of coffee by the ounce, that I load my own bags, and that I never forget my list. Frank still knows where the ripe avocados hide, he added in a line that made me laugh out loud in the aisle. I tucked both letters into the binder between the bank printouts and the copy of the pickup sale. Ordinary life, written down, looks like proof. By evening, the house felt different, not safer exactly, truer. I stood at the mantel and looked at Evelyn's picture and the shallow bowl where I'd set the brass key earlier, before I locked it away. I remembered the first week in this house, the echo in the rooms before we hung the first picture, the way we learned the patient rhythm of a place that becomes home because you tend it. I ran a finger along the frame. "They think I've already lost," I said into the quiet. "They think I'm a door they can lean on until it opens. They're wrong." The porch light clicked again. A car rolled slowly down the street, then turned the corner. I locked the front door, checked the back door, and set the alarm. On the nightstand, I left the binder, the manila folder, and the phone. I rested my hand on the cover like a man saying grace. "They don't know I hold the peace that changes everything," I whispered, not sure if I was talking to Evelyn, to myself, or to the dark that gathers before a storm. The house breathed with me. I closed my eyes and for the first time since Christmas morning let sleep come without rehearsing speeches. Tomorrow would have its own noise. Tonight belonged to the quiet facts I had set in place. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment too below to let me know you're here with me. Here's Chapter 4, written in the same first-person voice for an American 60-plus audience with clear, steady pacing, vivid but simple language, and all the required beats. The anonymous note, Michael's offer, the forged check call-out, filings, Dr. Sloan's letter, witness affidavits, the protective order, Sabrina's optics party, the Ridgeway storage hint, the black sedan, and the lead-in to the guardianship hearing. I've kept legal and money details concrete and woven in the new mini-climax number 2, the door slot threat about my capacity, while preserving the original arc and tone. I woke to the dull blue of winter and the soft rumble of the furnace settling the house. The hall still held a trace of last night's coffee, the kind of comfort smell that makes you think you can handle whatever the morning brings. Then I saw it, an unmarked envelope sticking through the mail slot like a blade. No stamp, no return address. Whoever brought it wanted no record beyond the cold air they let in. I slid a finger under the flap and found one sheet of paper, cut neat and centered with 12 words that looked like a hospital notice taped to a door. "You're not capable. Let the family decide. Don't resist." I read it once in the hallway. I read it again in the kitchen with the light on. By the third time, the words felt smaller than the hand that put them there. I took a photograph with the day's newspaper in the shot so the date would ride along, slipped the sheet into a clear sleeve, and set it by the toaster. My coffee hadn't finished dripping when I called Nora. She answered on the second ring, bright and awake. I read her the 12 words, steady as if I were rolling a serial number off a machine. She said, "Keep the original safe, send the photo, and expect a courier with a notice of representation before lunch." "They're building a story about capacity," she said. "We'll build a better record. Picture, timestamp, chain of custody. If anyone asks for keys or papers, you hand them my letter and close the door." There was no outrage in her voice, just steps, the kind that hold a line. Gravel crunched in the driveway while the coffee still steamed. Michael's SUV pulled in like it had muscle memory. He climbed out bareheaded, jacket open, no gloves, hands in pockets, like he owned the weather. No text ahead, no phone call, just one confident knock that sounded like it expected the latch to give. I opened the door and stood in the frame, shoulder braced to the wood. Hank's tip, a quiet way to say, "We'll talk here." Michael's eyes did their little tour down the hallway. He noticed the polished floor, the framed wedding photo, the neat stack of binders on the sideboard. He smiled. "Dad, let's make things easier," he said. "Older folks, you know, scammers hit them every day. You shouldn't have to worry about bills and keys and paperwork. Let me consolidate, streamline, and set up autopay. Just a gentle transition so you can relax." He liked words that glide across a table. Consolidate, streamline, transition. I let him talk until the pitch of his voice dropped, the way rain eases after it hits a gutter. Then I asked the question that had lived in my throat since the hospital months. "Did you know Sabrina forged my $15,000 check to a contractor in Tennessee?" Silence came hard and square. He blinked once, twice. He said he didn't know what I was talking about. He said if something happened with a contractor, it was probably a mix-up. He looked past my shoulder at the old rose bush by the steps as if it might bloom a better answer. Sometimes silence is a confession that knows better than words. I held my place in the doorway. "We'll keep the current system," I said. "Everything's in order." It's a small sentence until it's true. Then it weighs more than a speech. He nodded too quickly, said he'd check in later, and walked back to the SUV with the careful speed of a man leaving a room he had hoped to own. Inside, I opened my notebook and wrote the porch conversation the way a carpenter marks studs before a cut. Date, time, offer, words used, question asked, answer not given. Then I called Arthur. He said he had the language ready. Amend the trust schedule to add the Henderson Ridge cabin. Deed of transfer from me to myself as trustee. Affidavit of acceptance. He had a notary on standby and a courier headed to Nora's office. By lunch, he said, we put the cabin behind paperwork with teeth. That phrase landed in my chest and sat there like a brace against the wind. By 11, I was in Nora's conference room at the long table with the basket of pens that looked like a bouquet when you're nervous. The notary set her stamp on its ink pad like a small anvil. Arthur's packet arrived tabbed in colors. On top was the deed of transfer, all commas and measurements, the kind of strange poem a county reads when a person tries to pretend land belongs to everyone. Beneath it sat the trust amendment, moving the cabin under the protective clause Evelyn had chosen years back, a clean paragraph she had initialed with her careful hand. I read each page, slow and steady. I signed clean. The notary pressed her seal, and the paper took on that quiet authority you can feel with your fingers. We walked the folder across the square to the recorder's office. The room smelled like toner and thyme. A clerk with a tidy bun checked the legal description against a book that lay open like a family Bible. She aligned the pages on the glass and pulled a red stamp with a handle that belonged to another century. The date landed with a sound that made my shoulders finally drop. She wrote an instrument number in the corner. "Recording gives notice to the world," she said, and I told her I liked that phrase. When she slid the stamped copy back, I felt how different the paper becomes when a county has touched it. On the sidewalk, my phone buzzed. Michael texted asking to talk later about a gentle transition of responsibilities so I could relax. Transition again. I wrote the time on the back of the recorder's receipt with the short golf pencil I carry for notes, then watched a boy in a puffy coat chase a snowflake that wasn't there and laugh anyway. I drove home slow enough to see the frost line on each yard. At the house, I warmed soup and watched the street without staring at it. The black sedan from yesterday rolled by at the kind of speed people use when they're reading house numbers like clues. It didn't stop. It turned the corner and lingered long enough for me to write the time and the direction. At 3, Nora called to say the courier had served our notice of representation and a copy of my appointment confirmation with Dr. Sloan. Michael took the packet with a fixed smile. Sabrina wasn't home. An hour later, a calendar invite appeared on my phone titled Meeting About Dad, set for 10 in the courthouse cafe. I deleted it, wrote the time in my notebook, and called Nora. She said, "Don't go." "They're laying track for a story," she said. "We build ours with ledgers and stamps." I drove to the Veterans Center instead. The gym was bright and loud with the clatter of folding tables. We were sorting coats for the winter drive. I lifted boxes, checked sizes, wrote numbers on a yellow sheet, called men by name, asked Kenny about his knee, and found a soft blue scarf for Mrs. Jenkins. When the coordinator asked for a volunteer to manage the sign-in sheet, I stepped forward and wrote my name and the time in a clear hand. People took photos for the center's page. Ordinary proof is the best kind. After lunch, I sat in Dr. Sloan's office. It was the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thinking. She asked me to draw a clock and set the hands to 10 past 11. She asked me to repeat 5 words, talk about my morning, then repeat the words. She asked me to subtract by sevens, name animals, and explain how I pay my bills. I answered like a man teaching a younger version of himself how to keep a house running. Before I left, she said she would write a letter stating that I had requested the evaluation, that I was oriented to person, place, and time, that recall and judgment were intact, and that I was managing medications and finances without help. She would send it to Nora that afternoon and mail a copy to me. I thanked her and walked out into the air that felt lighter than the hour before. Nora called the next day. The deed transfer had been posted in the public index. The cabin now sat inside the trust with Evelyn's claws in front like a strong fence. "If anyone tries to do anything cute," she said, "the title company calls me before they warm up the printer." Then she told me she had mailed a second, shorter letter to Michael and Sabrina, and to a lawyer whose card Michael had left on a voicemail. The letter said any attempt to remove property or records from my home, transfer assets, or misrepresent my capacity would be treated as interference and met with relief from the court. The tone was polite and final in the same breath. Within the hour, Sabrina called using Michael's phone. Her voice came sugar-sweet with a metal edge. She said she was worried and that I was making things ugly. She said the cabin sat empty, and in her words, dead money should be liquid money for the family. A young couple could use it, or we could put the proceeds into something managed and safer, and she would handle it. I told her the cabin was not dead money. It was years stacked like firewood, and places like that don't go on clearance. She said I was proving their point. I told her the only point I was proving was that I could read a stamp and a deed, and that from now on, any questions should go to Nora. I hung up and wrote down the time. Dr. Sloane's letter arrived the next morning. I read it at the kitchen table while the kettle rattled. It stated I had requested the evaluation, that I was oriented to person, place, and time, that delayed recall was intact, that I had insight into my medical history, that I completed a multi-step bill pay task without error, and that I had safeguards for transactions over $5,000. It ended with a plain sentence only doctors can write without sounding loud. In her professional opinion, I was fully capable of managing my own affairs. I slid the letter into the binder, took a breath that reached all the way down, and felt something in my chest settle into place. That afternoon, Martha called from the hardware store. Sabrina had come in, phone to her ear, bought a heavy chain and a new padlock, and told the person on the line the unit on Ridgeway should be ready by the weekend. "Once we have the papers, it'll go fast," Sabrina had said. Martha kept her face still, rang the sale, wrote down the date and time after the door closed, and called me. I thanked her, pictured the long aisle of orange doors at Ridgeway, and reminded myself that staring at a fire does not make it cooler. I stayed with my list. On Thursday, a courier in a beige windbreaker walked up my steps with a thick envelope from Nora. He asked for my signature and crossed the street to Michael's door with a twin packet. Through their front window, I saw my son take the papers and hold them like something he expected to fold until he felt the weight. Sabrina stepped into the frame, talking fast. He turned a page, then another. Even from half a block away, I could see the moment he understood that a doctor's letter, a recorded deed, witness affidavits, bank alerts, and a notice of representation form a wall you don't shove with your shoulder. Friday brought a small mercy. Nora forwarded an email from the clerk. The judge had declined to move the hearing up. The date would stand. Michael wouldn't get his sprint. We had time to breathe and time to build. And Nora asked for one more affidavit, in my words, listing a week of ordinary tasks with dates and times. "Write it the way you speak," she said. No flourishes, just the truth with a clock beside it. I sat down and wrote Monday through Sunday in a neat column. Coffee at 6, news at 7, grocery list by weight and price per ounce, call to the bank for a 2-factor code, hardware visit for number 8 screws, veterans center pallets counted, each item an ordinary nail in a real frame. That evening, a neighbor texted me a screenshot from a social feed. Sabrina had hosted a gathering and posted about community and the duty to step up when elders begin to slip. The comments were filled with hearts and folded hands. I put the phone face down and let the room grow quiet again. Then I walked to the mailbox in the thin cold. The air tasted like iron. A black sedan idled near the pharmacy with a driver in a dark coat and sunglasses on a gray evening. He watched the street like a man waiting for a sandwich and a story at the same time. I wrote the time and the first 3 letters of the plate on a grocery receipt in my pocket. Saturday, Hank brought rock salt for the steps. He leaned on the railing the way old friends do when they have both time and concern. He said Michael had been in the store asking about trailer rentals and using the word downsizing. We spread salt in a thin line that looked like a small river. Hank told me about a client he once had who thought he could outtalk a ledger. We both smiled. You can't outtalk a ledger. You can only write your own and make sure it reads true. As the day settled toward dark, my phone chimed. Nora sent a single sentence. Protective order signed. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the photo from our last Christmas with Evelyn. In it, Michael stands beside Sabrina with his hand at her wrist, his eyes turned to her mouth like he's listening to a broadcast no one else can hear. The ache rose and fell. In its place came something steadier. Not rage. A line held. They thought I was weak, I said to the room. They're about to learn the difference between quiet and helpless. Later, when the house had settled and the furnace breathed like a large animal sleeping in the basement, I took the fireproof bag from the closet. I opened it, checked the brass key and the certified deed, and put both back. I wrote one last note for the day. Hearing set, record ready. Outside, a car slowed at the corner and rolled on. The streetlight hummed. The house breathed with me, warm and slow. I turned off the lamp and let the dark be itself. In bed, I ran the list like a prayer, not from fear, from habit. Deed filed, trust amended. Doctor's letter, bank limits and alerts. Affidavits from Martha and Sam. Notice of representation. Protective order. Veterans Center sign-in sheet. Photographs. Calendar invite recorded. Envelopes saved. Storage rumor noted. Sedan plate letters written down. Each item has another small nail holding the frame steady. I thought about the first 12 words slipped under my door at dawn and had to smile. I hadn't resisted. I had rebuilt, quietly, with stamps and signatures, with friends who mind counters and count change, with a doctor who writes plainly and a lawyer who speaks softly and carries a thick file. Before sleep took me under, I said one last sentence into the room so the walls could keep it for me until morning. They think they're ahead. They're already behind. Let them chase smoke. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. The envelope with the court seal arrived 2 days after Nora called me about the protective order. It was thick, heavier than it needed to be, and the paper inside smelled faintly of the courthouse, the dry air, the old ink, the press of hands that had passed it from one clerk to another. Michael and Sabrina had filed their petition for guardianship. The words ran across the page in sharp lines. Declining cognition, confusion in daily activities, unpaid bills, leaving stove on. Each phrase was written like it had already been proved, but I knew which half carried truth and which half was built from smoke. Yes, I once left a burner on when Evelyn was sick and I was rushing her medicine. Yes, I had been late with the gas bill when the hospital kept me 3 nights straight. But none of that was incapacity. That was grief and exhaustion, and grief is not a diagnosis. Nora came over that evening, her leather briefcase full enough to bend the zipper. She spread papers across my dining table where the varnish still held the marks of Thanksgiving knives and candle wax. This is their petition, she said, tapping the first packet. And this, she lifted another stack, is our response. Her copy was thicker by a finger's width. On top sat Dr. Sloane's letter, written in her careful hand, stating I had requested the evaluation myself, that my orientation was intact, my recall strong, my judgment sound. Beneath that lay the bank statements with my handwriting marking deposits and withdrawals, the bill of sale for the old pickup notarized at the county office, the affidavits from Martha at the hardware store and Sam at the grocery testifying to my daily conversations, my purchases, my decisions. Hank had provided a sworn statement, too, repeating what he heard Sabrina say at the storage unit, that once the papers were signed, the cabin could be listed and sold before spring. Nora stacked it all, page after page of ordinary proof, each one an iron nail in a real frame. The courthouse smelled of varnished benches and the faint tang of copier toner when we walked in the morning of the hearing. My boots clicked on the tiled floor the same way they had when I brought Michael here years ago for his traffic ticket. Then I had paid the fine for him, slipping a check across the clerk's desk while he scuffed his shoes and promised he would learn. Now he was across the aisle with Sabrina, their lawyer seated between them, his tie crisp and his pen moving quickly as if to keep the air in their favor. I sat beside Nora, our folders stacked neatly, my hands folded on the table, my mind steady as the frost outside the windows. The judge, a woman with gray hair pinned back in a simple twist, adjusted her glasses and called the case. She looked like someone who had read 1,000 lies and 1,000 truths and had learned the small tilt of the head that told them apart. Michael's lawyer began, his voice warm with practiced concern. He spoke of a father who had grown forgetful, who left bills unpaid, who repeated stories twice in an hour. He said it was with heavy hearts that Michael and Sabrina had come, but family had to step up when decline showed itself. Sabrina dabbed her eyes with a tissue at the right moments. Michael sat straight, his jaw clenched, nodding at the lawyer's words as if each one were a plank in a bridge he hoped to walk across to my house, my savings, my cabin. Then Nora stood. She did not raise her voice. She laid out Dr. Sloane's letter first, reading the line about my orientation to person, place, and time, the sentence about my ability to manage complex tasks, and the conclusion that I was fully capable of managing my own affairs. She held up the bank statements showing deposits I had made myself, checks I had signed, and transfers I had initiated with two-factor codes. She displayed the notarized bill of sale for the pickup, my signature verified by an officer of the state. Then she called Martha. Martha walked to the stand in her work boots, her store apron still dusted with sawdust from the morning shift. She spoke simply. She told the court I came in for screws, asked about the right size washers, paid in cash, chatted about the Veterans Center coat drive. She said she saw no decline, no confusion, only a man who still knew the weight of a box of nails and the measure of a tape pulled straight. Sam followed, telling the court how I shopped each Wednesday, choosing produce by ripeness, counting change, chatting with customers in line. Finally, Hank stood. He described being at the storage units when Sabrina came, phone to her ear, buying a chain and a lock, saying, "Once the papers are signed, we can list the cabin and split before spring." His words fell into the courtroom like a hammer on glass. Sabrina's hand froze on her tissue. Michael shifted in his seat, his ears red. Nora ended with the trust document, presenting the clause Evelyn had signed years ago. She explained that the cabin already sat inside the trust, protected by language that required my living consent for any sale or transfer. Without me, nothing could be done. The judge read the paragraph herself, her eyes narrowing slightly. Then she set the folder down and looked at Michael and Sabrina. The judge's questions were short and direct. Why did the petition not mention the protective clause in the trust? Why had they not sought medical evaluation through an independent doctor before filing? Why was the stove incident presented without the context of caregiving stress? Each question cracked their case like ice under a weight. Michael stammered, his voice catching on words. Sabrina tried to answer for him, saying it was for my own good, that they only wanted to make sure I was safe. Her voice broke when the judge asked why. If safety was the goal, she had spoken of selling the cabin and splitting the proceeds. The decision came in a voice firm enough to still the entire room. The judge denied the guardianship petition. She affirmed the protective order, barring any interference with my assets or financial decisions. She stated plainly that capacity was intact, that family disagreements over property did not constitute incapacity, and that the court would not be used as a crowbar to pry open a trust. The gavel sounded, not loud, but final. Michael's face flushed deep red. Sabrina whispered frantically to the lawyer, her hands twisting the tissue into a wet rope. They left the courtroom quickly, their shoulders tight, their steps uneven. I walked out slowly, each breath of cold winter air filling me with a kind of lightness I had not felt in months. Outside, the sun shone on the courthouse steps, glinting off the frost. I placed my hand in my pocket and touched the brass key to the cabin, the one Evelyn had left for me. I knew what I had to do. Within a week, with Nora and Arthur's help, I amended the trust again. The Henderson Ridge cabin was no longer just a family retreat. It was formally dedicated as a veterans and families retreat through the trust, its deed bound by law to serve that purpose after I was gone. No individual could sell it, no heir could carve it up. It would outlast the arguments and the greed. It would stand as something Evelyn and I built that no betrayal could touch. Signing that amendment felt like laying the final brick in a wall that could weather any storm. Word spread quickly. The veterans at the center hugged me, clapped me on the shoulder, and offered to help repair the dock come spring. I stood there, smiling, and felt Evelyn's hand in mine, though it was only the wind. The cabin would not be dead money. It would be living proof. Michael tried to call. He left a voicemail late one night, his voice tired, saying they had made mistakes, that they only wanted to help. I listened once. I did not call back. I set the phone down, poured myself a glass of water, and whispered into the kitchen air, "I don't need them anymore. I have myself." The days that followed settled into a rhythm I hadn't known since before the sickness. I drove to the cabin one afternoon, snow packed hard on the road, the pines heavy with white. The key turned in the lock, and the door opened to the smell of old wood and pine needles. The lake was frozen, the ice shining under the pale sun. I stacked wood in the stove, struck a match, and watched the flame catch. The crackle filled the silence, and I sat back in the old chair Evelyn loved. For the first time in months, maybe years, peace wrapped around me like a blanket that fit. The house in town still stood, the one worth nearly $600,000, but it no longer felt like a prize to be defended. It was simply a roof over my head. The real treasure now was the quiet, the certainty, the knowledge that the storm had passed and I was still standing. Michael and Sabrina had their own house, their own debts, their own silence. I heard from neighbors that they argued more now, that money seemed tighter, and that friends drifted away. The community had seen their performance, and masks rarely fit again once torn. I did not gloat, I did not celebrate, I simply lived. I shoveled the walk, waved at Hank, picked up my groceries, and volunteered at the center. Each task, each ordinary act felt like a small victory. The weight of betrayal no longer sat on my chest. I breathed without checking the street for sedans. I slept without waking to phantom envelopes. The lesson grew in me slowly, like sap rising in spring. Family is not the ones who sign their names on your checks or angle for your house. Family is the ones who respect you, who sit with you without trying to measure what you're worth. Evelyn had known that. She had left me tools, trust, and the quiet reminder that dignity matters more than inheritance. Truth matters more than appearances. And self-respect is the only inheritance you can guarantee. One evening, sitting by the stove at the cabin, I said it out loud, not for anyone else, just for myself. The truth always wins, and dignity is mine to keep. The flames flickered, the logs popped, and I knew Evelyn would have smiled. Life had become simple again. I rose early, made coffee, read the paper, and drove to the center to sort donations. I kept the cabin key on my ring, a small weight that reminded me I was not empty-handed. The betrayal had burned, yes, but fire also clears the ground. What grew after was stronger. The voicemail from Michael stayed on the phone. I never deleted it, but I never returned it either. It was not my duty to carry his regret. It was not my burden to soothe the ache of his choices. He would have to walk that road himself. I had chosen mine, and it led toward peace. As winter edged toward spring, I thought about planting tomatoes again, the way Evelyn liked. I thought about painting the porch at the cabin, the one that faced the lake. I thought about joining the reading group at the library, where a flyer said they needed more men. Each thought was small, ordinary, but it felt like planning a future that was mine alone. The judge's words still echoed when the nights grew quiet. Capacity intact, petition denied, protective order affirmed. Each phrase was a stone in the foundation of my peace. Michael and Sabrina's world had tilted, their schemes crumbled, but mine had steadied. I did not hate them. Hate is another chain. I simply closed the door. And as I stacked wood for the last cold weeks of March, I found myself humming. Not for Evelyn, not for Michael, not for Sabrina, but for me. For the life still ahead, unburdened, unclaimed, free. That night, before turning in, I opened the window at the cabin and let the cold air fill the room. The stars hung sharp, the lake silent under its ice. I whispered once more, so softly the sound barely left my lips. I have myself. And that was enough. The courthouse fight was over, the papers signed, the order sealed. When I stepped out into that winter air after the hearing, I thought peace might take months to arrive, but it came quicker than I expected. Not in a thunderclap, not in fireworks, but in small, steady ways. Each morning I woke without the weight of someone else's scheme pressing against my chest. I felt lighter. Each evening I locked my own door without fear of who might be plotting on the other side, and I felt stronger. The guardianship was denied, the protective order was mine, and the trust for the cabin was sealed. That was the foundation on which I would now build my days. Life became steady in a way that felt both strange and deeply familiar. I set a schedule, nothing dramatic, just the simple rhythm of a man who no longer carried a fight on his back. On Mondays and Thursdays, I volunteered with the Veterans Roof Project. We patched shingles, cleared gutters, and replaced broken panels for men and women who had worn uniforms decades ago, but still carried pride in their spines. My knees ached, but I carried shingles up the ladder with a grin. On Tuesdays, I jogged lightly around the park, one slow lap at a time, nodding at the same faces, feeling the cold air fill my lungs. Wednesdays became grocery days, where Sam at the counter always asked about the cabin. Fridays, I sat in the corner of a coffee shop on Main Street, sipping the same black brew Evelyn used to order, reading from the stack of novels she had left on the shelf. Saturdays, I drove out to Henderson Ridge, stood on the dock, and listened to the lake breathe under ice. Arthur confirmed the trust paperwork was now complete. The Veterans Retreat would begin its first programs in the spring. The budget allowed $12,000 a year for maintenance, drawn from the funds Evelyn had set aside. That money, invested wisely, would outlive me and provide a safe place for families who needed a breath of fresh air. I told Arthur to keep it simple: wood for the stove, shingles for the roof, groceries for the kitchen, and a canoe or two for the lake. Nothing fancy, just honest tools for honest rest. It was in those moments, driving back from the cabin with snow dust on the windshield, that I felt Evelyn's presence strongest. I would put my hand on the seat beside me and whisper, "I kept your promise." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of all the nights she had planned quietly, all the notes she had hidden, all the strength she had left behind for me. As weeks passed, I thought more about what the whole ordeal had taught me. Betrayal hurts, yes, but silence hurts worse. Had I stayed quiet, they might have walked straight into my life and stripped it bare. Self-respect meant opening my mouth, calling a lawyer, and holding the line. I said it aloud one night at the cabin, sitting by the fire with my boots off. Self-respect means not letting anyone else write your story. I repeated it twice, feeling the truth settle. Boundaries are not cruel. They are love pointed in the right direction. Love yourself and love the people who truly honor you. I still received whispers of Michael and Sabrina. A neighbor mentioned they had moved out of their house, downsizing into a smaller apartment after selling the SUV. The shine had worn off their smiles. They tried to keep their heads up at the grocery, but folks no longer waved the way they once did. Reputation in a small community is like a pane of glass. Once cracked, it never looks the same. Sabrina sent a letter, a half apology written in looping script, saying they were sorry if things came across the wrong way. I placed the letter in a drawer and left it unanswered. I had no use for half apologies, no use for bridges built on sand. Rumor reached me that the bank was quietly reviewing that old $15,000 check, the one with my forged signature. Fraud alerts had been triggered not by me, but by their own internal systems, and the investigation was inching forward. I did not pursue it, did not feed it, but I let the truth stand on its own. Some consequences arrive slowly, but they arrive all the same. The contrast between my days and theirs could not have been sharper. While they scrambled with bills and sideways glances, I woke each morning with purpose. The Veterans Retreat held its first weekend in early March. 10 families came, fathers and mothers with children who had never seen the lake under snow. We cooked chili in the iron pot Evelyn loved. The kids repaired an old snowmobile with Hank's help, their laughter spilling out across the frozen shore. At night, we lit a fire, and one young father pulled me aside. His voice cracked when he said, "This is the first time we felt like we belonged somewhere." I just nodded, too choked to speak, and in that moment the cabin's worth soared beyond dollars. It had become what it was always meant to be, a sanctuary. As I drove home that Sunday evening, the truck warm from the stove smell still clinging to my coat, I thought about the lessons that ought to be said aloud. Parents like me must learn this. Sacrifice is not endless, and love does not mean letting yourself be used. Provide, yes. Support, yes. But never at the cost of dignity. There must be a line where your child stands on their own 2 feet, where your signature is your own, not theirs to forge. And for children, the lesson is different, but just as vital. Gratitude is not optional. Respect is not old-fashioned. A father's house or a mother's savings are not prizes to be claimed. They are the fruit of years you did not see, sacrifices you will never fully understand. To betray that trust is to cut the very branch you sit on. And what about the wider world, this modern age where families scatter and money whispers louder than memory? The lesson is that human nature has not changed. Greed still circles like a hawk, but so does conscience. Betrayal can dress itself in suits and polite words, but truth has its own armor. In the end, character is the only wealth that cannot be repossessed. One afternoon, while sorting donated coats at the Veterans Center, I found an old watch in the pocket of a wool jacket. It was scratched, the band worn thin, but when I wound it, the hands moved. I brought it home, set it on my nightstand, and every time I looked at it, I thought of my father. He used to say, "Time tells the truth." That watch ticked steadily through the night, and I knew it was right. Time had told the truth, and I had lived to see it. Spring crept in slowly. The ice broke on the lake, the water glimmered silver under the afternoon sun, and the cabin's dock creaked, as it always had. I left my phone on silent most days now. The voicemails piled up, a mix of bank alerts, volunteers, and once in a while, another attempt from Michael. I listened to none of them. One evening, standing by the shore, I whispered to myself, "I don't need their words. I have my life." The water rippled, carrying the sentence out like a promise. The truth is, boundaries are not a wall that keeps love out. They are the fence that protects it. By setting mine, I had not destroyed my family. I had saved the only piece of it that mattered, my own integrity. And maybe, just maybe, Michael would learn someday that respect was the key to love, not signatures on deeds. But that was his lesson, not mine to force. I ended the chapter of my life with them, not in anger, but in clarity. If Sabrina wrote again, if Michael called again, I would let the letters sit unanswered and the calls go to silence. Until they chose honesty, there was no room for them. And that decision was not cruel. It was survival. It was self-respect, and self-respect was Evelyn's last gift to me. On a warm April evening, I sat on the porch of the cabin watching the ice melt into ripples. The sun dipped low, painting the lake in streaks of silver and gold. My hands rested on my knees, the old watch ticking quietly inside. I breathed deep and felt the kind of stillness that is not empty, but full. I thought, character is the one asset no one can ever take. And in that thought, I closed the book on the months of turmoil. I am not naive. Life will always bring storms. Betrayals may come again, even from faces you once trusted. But now, I know what to do. Speak truth, set boundaries, protect dignity, and keep walking forward. As the last light touched the lake, I whispered a final time to Evelyn, to myself, to the quiet air. I finally found where I belong. The water lapped softly at the dock, the pines swayed, and peace settled in for good. The story has come to an end. It has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.